everyone. We are now continuing our workshop to the next agenda. Now this third panel will be conducted by two speakers, Dr. Helen van Klippen and Dr. Baru Gadjah, and will be chaired by Dr. Marit and Prof. Monteiro. Yes, Dr. Gadjah. Without further ado, let us now welcome our chair speaker who will be chaired by Dr. Gadjah.
Yes, thank you all for getting back from the coffee break. This is our last session and I am looking very much forward to it. Dr. Helene van Klippen will join us live and deliver her lecture live, while Bambang will join us by the Zoom on the screens, but she will be able to see us currently, so she can also see what we are doing today. So let me briefly introduce you Dr. Helene van Klippen. It's my pleasure actually. She's a former UN political affairs officer and co-founder of Histories, an organization dedicated to preserving and sharing the histories of those affected by conflict in East Timor. Above all, for me, she's a very enthusiastic person who graciously accepted our invitation to give this lecture today. And we are very fortunate to have us here with us, because I think all of you are eager to learn from her and her research. She received her PhD from the University of Queensland in Brisbane, in Australia, and her dissertation explores the complex history of child transfers from East Timor to Indonesia. And today, Helene will be discussing her book based on that dissertation, Making Them Indonesians. And in this book, I think you beautifully intertwine big political, social, and cultural narratives with this microhistory, these personal stories of children, which gives us a nuanced perspective of these transfers. Above all, and this is very interesting, is the ambivalence in these child transfers, often unorganized and improvised, as well as the more systemic aspects embedded in these, rescue narratives, discourses of help and saving children. So with further ado, it's yours. Thank you.
Selamat siang. Thank you very much for the invitation to speak here. I'm actually delighted after having finished my research so many years ago to be able to have this opportunity. And also I'm very pleased that my research is still relevant. And the Dutch researchers told me that they were influenced by the Stolen Generation reports in Australia, and I have to say that was in my case too, because I grew up hearing stories from my mother about Aboriginal children, Australian Indigenous children in institutions, but I never knew how they got there. And this, so this was a real sort of connection for me to, if this happened, it was kept secret in Australia, this could also be the case in the case of Indonesia and East Timor. So I'm talking about East Timor during the occupation by Indonesia from 1975 to. Is it all right if I'm here? Can you all hear me? Put up your hand Yeah, it's good. I feel a bit funny. So, in East Timor, in the Netherlands Indies, as we've been hearing, until 1945, Netherlands New Guinea until 1962, in the Belgian colonies, in the French territories, in Africa, in Australia, Canada, and the United States, and even today in Ukraine and Russia. We see over and over again colonial administrations and very often their military backers removing children from their families to be educated in their institutions. Authorities realise that force alone will never secure the colonised people. They need cooperation. So there's this special place for children in this mission, taking them young, educating them, so that they will help in governing the dominating population. The irony is that Indonesia, a former colony of the Netherlands, engaged in this colonial practice in East Timor, when just 20 years earlier, Indonesia had affirmed the principles of self-determination and non-aggression in the Asia-Africa Conference in Bandung. President Sukarno was the leader of the non-aligned world. Of course, we all know what changed in Indonesia. In 1965, there was a military coup which brought Suharto's new order to power. And with backing from Western nations, including Australia and the Netherlands, the socialist aspirations of the Indonesian Revolution of 1945 were overthrown. The new order was fiercely anti-communist and systematically annihilated members of the Communist Party of Indonesia and its sympathisers. But then, only 10 years later, the Indonesian military invaded Portuguese Timor, fearing that it would become a communist base. The bloody invasion was portrayed by the new order as benevolent intervention for the sake of peacekeeping, decolonisation and development. And in Indonesia to this day, there is little recognition that the removal of children from East Timor and also from Papua, it's a different story, was a denial of the rights of these children. It was, and largely still is, deemed to be for the benefit of the child. Gadjah, the Asia Justice and Rights Organisation, does acknowledge this and is working to reunite children and their families in East Timor, and you'll hear more about that from Ibu Wanita. Now, just like Ayu and Eka, sometimes you come across something that's highly significant in your research. I was very lucky that I found this at the beginning of my research in 2004, rather than after I completed my research. So I was looking through the archives of the Indonesian National Archives in Jakarta, with bits of paper flying off every time I turned the page, no matter how carefully, and I was absolutely astonished when I found this photo. I thought, what's going on? This is President Suharto and his wife, Ibu Tin, the one's in the middle, you can see that, those two. And then we have, sorry, I'll just, so I'll just tell you a bit more about, we'll go into more about the photo in a minute. The children, all of the children are from East Timor. It appeared, this photograph was in the newspapers, in Compass, the national daily, on the 5th of September 1977. So in time I learned about the significance of this photograph and about many of these children, why they were brought to Indonesia from East Timor and what happened to them. In fact, the photo captures the whole sorry story of the integration of East Timor with Indonesia. That was the word that was used for the colonisation, and the removal of children in furthering the project. So let's take a closer look. So besides the president and his wife, there's the governor of East Timor, whom you can't see, but you can see his wife. His wife is on the right. On the right. The other side. That one. The lady with the dark glasses. That's the wife of the governor of East Timor, who accompanied the children to Indonesia. There are several other ministers who came to the palace where they met the president. The Minister of State at that time was Sudarmono, he was later the Vice President, and the Governor of Central Java was there too, to receive the children who would later be sent to an orphanage in Central Java. So I thought to myself, this is a lot of fuss being made of 20 small children between the ages of 4 and 10. What is going on? Well, similar photographs appeared in other newspapers showing this meeting, which occurred on the 3rd of September 1977. At that time, the press was heavily censored, so there was no mention of the invasion of East Timor on 7 December 1976, the year before, the bombing and encirclement campaigns and the herding of people into concentration camps in East Timor, where thousands died of hunger. The fighting in East Timor was represented as a struggle between those who wanted to join Indonesia against Fretilin, the enemy, which wanted independence. Now, these children were described in the press as being orphaned when their parents had been killed by Fretilin in their fight to join Indonesia. That was certainly the case with some of the children who were taken to Indonesia, which is another story, but not with this group of children. So it came about on the 16th of August in 1977, during Suharto's State of the Nation address, that he offered amnesty to Fretilin, the resistance in East Timor, if they surrendered. And then immediately after this address, he ordered that 20 young children be brought to meet the president. He saw it as a propaganda opportunity by having himself photographed with war orphans from East Timor. He showcased to Fretilin, to whom the amnesty was offered, and to all East Timorese, the generosity of Indonesia and the benefits that would accrue by joining Indonesia. The new order believed that development, particularly education, would persuade Indonesians to support his regime. But the curriculum, of course, was full of new order propaganda, with the aim of cementing its rule. Despite this, Indonesian young people wanted to take up the opportunities and education offered. And Suharto believed that the same material benefits, including education, offered by Indonesia to the East Timorese would also persuade them they would be better off if they joined Indonesia. During the Portuguese era, only the children of the elite had access to education. One of the first things that the Indonesian military did in East Timor was to set up schools, even in the overcrowded concentration camps. Here's a picture of all the 20 children. You can see all the other officials who brought them, who were involved. The children were described as orphans, but most had family members who were caring for them at the time. And in many cases, they were separated the fate of their parents was still not known. The military was instrumental in organising this group of children to Jakarta, to Indonesia, and brought them on a military aircraft to Jakarta. Soldiers took them on excursions around Jakarta. They visited Taman Mini theme park, perhaps inspired by Dam, the Netherlands, and other insights that must have astounded the children. They were given yellow uniforms. They're all dressed in yellow, think gold car, new shoes and books, and on the 3rd of September, were taken to the palace to meet the president. The president and his wife are smiling as other officials. The children also seem to be happy. But one can only speculate about how these children might have been feeling, taken from isolated villages in the mountains of East Timor, unable to speak Indonesian. They had never even been to the small town then of Dili. Jakarta must have overwhelmed them. They had to sing from the president an Indonesian song they had been taught by soldiers in Dili. I'm happy here, I'm happy there, I'm happy everywhere. The president and his wife described themselves as the father and mother of the nation of Indonesia. And by receiving these young children, they were showing to the nation that their care extended to East Timorese, even members of the enemy Fretilin, who had just been offered amnesty. This is Ibu Tin, President's wife, serving the children drinks and snacks, not by servant, which would not probably normally be the case when the Saharas were guests. Ibu Tin even helped them wash their hands. The papers described her as being emotionally moved because these little orphans had to travel so far away from home to be educated. They were also described as the children of East Timorese parents who had been fighting to integrate with Indonesia. So they were a powerful symbol also of Fretilin cruelty, showing that East Timorese were so determined to integrate with Indonesia that they were prepared to suffer and die. It was also during, it was the fasting month of Ramadan at the time. So the Saharas are serving food and drinks to the children who are assumed to be Catholics, though they themselves were fasting. They were showing that Indonesia is a tolerant nation and accepts them all. Next slide, please. Then it was time to leave. Here the officials are lined up and the children are shown a polite Javanese way of shaking hands. Someone being shown which hand he has to use your right hand, yeah, this one. This practice was no doubt totally strange to the children and caused them confusion. And it is reflected in the smiles and sidelong glances of the officials. So the message is, Indonesia is happy and ready to civilise the backward East Timorese. It's demonstrated to this small group of representative Timorese. The whole integration effort is projected literally onto the bodies of these hapless children. The President also called on the nation to help in this effort, and I'll come to that shortly. Now, this is the compass photographer knew how to capture an intimate moment in this photograph. So this boy, the one in the middle of the front, that one, he's not looking at the camera, is Petrus Canisius Algeria. I later met him. He told me about his experience with some of the other children in this photo. And you can read the story in my book and an abridged version on the Story of the website. As an army commander, Suharto was concerned for the destitute and orphan children of Indonesian soldiers, even before he became president. He established a family foundation, Damais, which paid a small amount towards the care and education of children in orphanages. In Dili, before Indonesia invaded, there was an orphanage run by the Portuguese administration. And after the invasion, the Indonesian military took over this orphanage. It was given the name Saroja, the name of the military campaign that staged the invasion. It was no doubt envisaged that the children living there would be the children of parents fighting for integration with Indonesia. Indeed, at the time of the invasion, there were a few children living at the orphanage whose parents had been killed by Fredlin during the conflict between political parties in September 1975, which occurred just before the invasion. So it seems that the president had the idea to bring children whose parents had been killed by Fredlin to reward them with an Indonesian education in Java, Indonesian heartland. However, there were not many of them, so officials were told to collect 2 orphans from each district of East Timor, sort of representative orphans. So Indonesian soldiers asked people living in the concentration camps to register orphans. They were paid care in an institution and a free education. Soldiers mentioned nothing to them, nothing about sending them to Java. Now Petrus was, at the time, was being cared for by older siblings after his parents died in the war. He was about 10 years of age. He and his 7-year-old cousin were chosen from the district where he lived and taken to Dili. Soldiers took the children away at night, and that made his older siblings fearful. The children were placed in the Saroja orphanage in Dili, and Petrus believed that he would attend school in Dili. So the departure of the children to Java was organised in a great hurry. The children had no time to ask permission from family members or inform them about their departure. Meeting Suharto as soon as possible to fill a propaganda opportunity was to place ahead of the needs of the children and the responsibilities to their families. After this meeting with Suharto, the children were taken to Central Java, to the Catholic orphanage in Ungaran. It's north of here, closer to Semarang. And they were placed in the asrama, Panti Asuhan Santo Thomas. It was run by an indigenous Catholic order of women, and the order had no international links like other international Catholic orders, therefore no source of foreign funding. Someone has also mentioned this idea about funding already. It was quite likely that the nuns believed that the help they were promised by Suharto would enable them to care for the children. But Petrus Canisius told me he believed that the promises made by Suharto to pay for their care and education were not fulfilled, and life for the children in the orphanage was very difficult. One of the children, Henry Araujo, sorry, can we just go back to the full picture? Sorry, it's the one in front of the 14. That one. He ran away with 4 other children. The others were caught or found and returned to the orphanage, but not Hendrik. Again, the story is in my book, you can read it there. Petrus still feels distress that one of his number disappeared without trace. The children had no further contact with home except a short visit in 1985. Soldiers accompanied some of those who lived close to Dili to their villages, such as Petrus. Their military minders probably feared the children might run away or be influenced by anti-integration ideology. These transfers of East Timorese children to Indonesia by the President led to a prevailing attitude which condoned transferring young children out of East Timor as an acceptable way to help the many destitute East Timorese children and also to support integration. In villages and towns throughout Indonesia, this scenario by Suharto was reproduced. Soldiers took thousands of children on their return to Indonesia. Some of the children were separated during the fighting. Some desperate parents agreed to the soldiers' office to educate their children. Some parents were forced, even at gunpoint, to sign letters of surrender of their children to soldiers. Many of the children had been working as soldiers' helpers, tenaga bantuan operasi. They were literally smuggled out of Indonesia on the boats that left East Timor when they were returning to Indonesia. Others were taken by public servants, even ordinary individuals who wanted to emulate the president. Often it was genuine concern for the desperate situation of the children they encountered, never acknowledged as a situation created by Indonesia itself. In Indonesia, most children were given some minimal education, but many were treated as servants by those who took them away. In most cases, those who took the children did not help them search for their families or help them have continuing contact with their communities in East Timor. The children were often forbidden even to talk about East Timor. They grew up as Indonesians. Thousands of other children were taken, this is sort of ties in with the topic of the theme of this summer school. Thousands were taken also to religious institutions in Indonesia. Besides Santo Thomas in Ungaran, other Catholic institutions cared for children. And then at the beginning of the 1990s, there was a concerted effort to increase the Muslim population of East Timor. There are many Indonesian Muslims living in East Timor, but they had no religious facilities there. But most Timorese had chosen to become Catholics. So many children were sent to Islamic boarding schools, some from throughout Indonesia. Probably these institutions accepted the children for reasons similar to the Santo Thomas in Ungaran. So Suharto's Damai's foundation promised scholarships for the children, and later the Indonesian Department of Social Welfare provided funding for the care of children in institutions. I estimated at least 4,000 children were taken to Indonesia. Conservative estimate. The governor of East Timor during the 1980s, Marit, told me that every time military boats returned to Indonesia from East Timor, children were taken away. Again, these are rough estimates. I put about half by soldiers and half by institutions of state and religious. Like Suharto, they claimed their actions were benevolent and they wanted to help children suffering in war situations. But the soldiers and those who ran the institutions believed that they were contributing to the integration project. As we saw, the 20 children brought to the palace to Suharto. Children lost contact with their families, with their language, culture and communities in East Timor. They became Catholics, Protestants and Muslims. Their names were changed and they spoke only Indonesian. While many got some education, many others disappeared. The welfare of the child was less important than the role they could play in this integration project. So Petrus Canisius did manage to complete his education in Gadjah. He returned to East Timor, and like so many other East Timorese educated in Indonesia and in Indonesian, in East Timor, he voted for independence in 1999. And after independence, he became the principal of a junior high school in Dili. Despite everything, the years of separation from East Timor and his family and the hardships, he is grateful for the opportunity he had to study in Indonesia. By the late 1990s, Timorese were able to travel more freely, and many had gone voluntarily to Indonesia to study. They spoke fluent Indonesian. All their education had been in Indonesian, but they rejected being Indonesian. And as the new order regime began to weaken, those East Timorese living in Indonesia joined together with Indonesian activists, agitating against the new order regime and supporting each other against a common oppressor. Students educated in Indonesian by Indonesians engaged in clandestine anti-integration activities, and after the fall of Suharto in 1998, which had opened the door for the referendum in East Timor, they were the main force in educating the people in East Timor about the choices in the referendum. There were groups of students going around doing this. They had all been educated by Indonesia. And the referendum was conducted by the United Nations in 1999. So East Timorese benefited from the colonial education, which broadened their perspectives in government schools and institutions of higher education in East Timor and Indonesia, despite the fact that these taught only in Indonesian with modes of New World propaganda. It was just like Indonesians themselves during the colonial period. They were educated in Dutch colonial schools and also in the Netherlands, and became the leaders of the independence struggle in Indonesia. So the words of Ben Anderson, the renowned scholar of Indonesia, education, development and repression by the military combined in an explosive mixture that led to deepening nationalism, especially among young Timorese, and I think we can say the same about Indonesians. Thank you.
Thank you, Elena. Now I think some people are doing some magic and getting that on the Zoom screen. Can you hear it? Yes. Chief Director of the Timor-Leste Truth Commission, and did field work and then drafted key chapters in the Truth Commission report Chenga. Also Senior Associate for the International Center for Transnational Justice, and worked on the accountability in Indonesia and Timor. And today, Ms. Vandita is the Director of Gadjah, Asia Justice and Rights, an organization dedicated to strengthening accountability and justice in the Asia-Pacific region. And Gadjah has, as we heard from Helena already, a remarkable program aimed at locating and reuniting the stolen children from Timor-Leste, who were then transferred to Indonesia and then reunite them with their biological families, who remained in Timor-Leste. Through my Australian colleague Leah Kent, I already had the pleasure of learning about the Gadjah reunification initiatives and as well as the report. And I can honestly say that these reunification initiatives provide me as a scholar and us as a learning community crucial insights into the lives, but also in the transfers and to what it means to be reunified with your family altogether. So these experiences of these children and their families are foregrounded. And today I believe you will share these findings from this recent study, which you did with Leah Kent from the Australian National University, whereby you research these experiences of these students in the reunification processes. And the floor is yours.
Thank you. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you. Yes.
Okay, good. Great. Well, thank you very much for inviting me. And also thank you for the upgrade. My invitation say Dr. Galuwandita. I only have a humble master's degree, but thank you for that. Oh, hold on. I think I'm trying to show my screen, but somebody else has my screen on as well. So can you not see my screen? I think I'm trying to share the screen. Yeah, so there might be double screen. Can you see my screen? It says the constant longing, it's black. All right, so I'm showing my screen, so can somebody give me the host or co-host? Okay, I'll try again. Oh, where is it? Oh, there it is. Oh no, I'm very confused now. I had it on already, but maybe, let me try. Okay, am I co-host now? Can I share my screen? Yeah, okay. Let me see if this works now. Okay, can you see it? Okay, good. All right. Okay. So, just a couple of things. I think, this paper with Leah Kent with the ANU is a unique a unique cooperation. Sometimes we, as civil society, we kind of venture forth creating our own papers, and it's very rare that in my organization anyway to do work with academia, and I think that's something of a challenge that for both sides we really need to be able to produce knowledge together. We both need each other, and the fact that when we produce knowledge, we need to make sure that survivors and the people we are researching are very much part of the production of knowledge, and that the impact of knowledge has to benefit also the people that we are trying to talk about. So in that way, that's very much how we've been trying to work on the stolen children. And also, I think I should note that in Indonesia, we are not business as usual. We are at a really a cross section. We have just elected one of the people very much involved, one of the person very much involved in mass violations in Timor-Leste, as well as in Indonesia. It is a very sad moment in our progress or regression from democracy and human rights in Indonesia. So I think this is a challenging time for everyone, including people working in human rights, civil society, and I hope academia as well, that it's not just, we're going to be doing research on this old stuff and it doesn't relate to current situation. It really does relate to the current situation, and it has to be relevant, the work that we do, the knowledge that we gather, the comparisons that we make, because if not, we can get lost and more violence can happen. So in that context, I think it's important, and I think Helene already tried to portray, but a lot of young people in Indonesia do not know a lot about what happened in Timor-Leste during the Indonesian occupation from 1975 to 1999. So when we talk about the stolen children, the children who were taken forcibly from Timor-Leste,
without the genuine consent of their parents. We need to place it within the bigger context of the systematic and widespread human rights violations that took place during that time. And children very much experience similar violations as adults, including sexual violence. They were recruited as child soldiers, or focusing on logistics, and the thousands of children who were taken mostly by soldiers in the beginning, but later on by yayasans and by individuals, and and then in 1999 during the referendum, it also changed how the children were brought, but it was basically from 1975 to 1999. Right now, with Gadjah, out of the stolen children, we're still working with survivors of rape and their children who were not raped. We're now documenting some 450 something survivor stories and pushing for truth and justice. So, the work there is so much work to be done. And that's just Timor-Leste. There's a lot in Indonesia as well. And as I said, we are in a situation where we're very much in danger in terms of changing the history or whitewashing history about what happened during those years. So just to say that now we have done 10 reunions in the last 10 years, and we have found, I believe, 201 survivors, who we call stolen children, or in Tebun, Labari Lakon, missing children. Now all adults, obviously, they were taken, 30, 40, sometimes 50 years ago, and we reunited 101 of them. So it is a drop in the ocean. There is so much more work to do, and really we are at the 11th hour if we are in the business of, right now the work is all from memory. So the children who still remember a sliver of memory about their village or the names of their parents, we have a working group from both countries, Indonesia and Timor-Leste. We look for the survivors first, and then we look for their families. It's really, very hard work going into sort of really distant places, remote areas in Indonesia. Anywhere where there were army bases, we'll find Timorese, and then the strong oral history in Timor-Leste, usually we're able to find somebody, an elder in the village that still remembers, oh, that family had lost their child. In many cases, the families never gave up. They still were looking for them. They have their plates set out for different rituals for the children who were missing, or they were already given a gravestone to mark them as dead because of this long period of separation. So that's kind of the context of our research. I know I don't have that much time, so I can't tell you everything about how we do it and what we found. But the research that we're doing, and I, please read the paper. It's online in the Gadjah website. I think I already sent the link to the organizers. But it's the first time we try to research in more in-depth, only 8 stories, so 8 survivors, and then what happened to them and what happened to their families. So, it's not, we have a lot more information, a lot more data, but we tried to do like this in-depth process. And we also tried to make findings that we could share with Centro Nasional Cegah, the follow-on Truth Commission that is at the CABR, what used to be the Truth Commission office. And this is an institution set up by the Prime Minister in Timor-Leste to ensure that the recommendations of the Truth Commissions are followed up. I sit in the advisory panel of that institution as a methodology from our Stone and Flower manual. So it's a participatory action research where survivors can tell their stories in a way that has not only the sadness of the story, but some way for it to be also focusing on the strength, the resilience, and sometimes the joy that they have in their experiences. So particularly, we use this methodology called body mapping, where, as you can see in this example, people lie down on the floor, they map out their bodies, and then there's a whole series of questions about how their violations, impacted their organs, their thoughts, and then they also do the kind of their chronology of their childhood till their adulthood on the side. So at the end of, a 3-day process, we have the stories, we have a beautiful art piece, as well as kind of the ideas of what we need to change or what has to happen so that survivors can get a little bit of truth and a little bit of justice. And we did the same process with the family members in Dili in Timor-Leste. So those are some of the other body maps. So what are some of the findings? Well, they echo the findings that already mentioned by Helene in her research, as well, of course, the research of the Truth Commission, that there was children were taken in different ways, members of the military, Islamic education institutions. There was some kind of, in some cases, there was some kind of agreement. Most of them felt that there was coercion for sure, and that there was that ideology of like making them Indonesian, as Helene has talked to us today. And in where they are, in growing up, a lot of them experienced abuse, isolation, loss of identity, loss of language and culture. Many had their education disrupted. Out of our 200 and so, I think most of them are illiterate. A few, were in middle-class families that then got access to education, but that's a much smaller number than those who did not end up getting any access to education. In fact, in an older paper that Gadjah wrote called Long Journey Home, I think we wrote it in 2015. If you're interested in this topic, it's important to look at that research as well, because we clearly say that this fits into the human right violation of disappearance, forced disappearances, and also many of the children experience some form of slavery, torture or treatment, and many of the girls experience gender-based violations. So in Timor-Leste, the families talked about some people became sick because they were too Hanoi Barak. They had too many thoughts. One person actually died from this condition. That's, of course, it's not a medical diagnosis, but it's what the community said. And people feeling guilty about allowing their child to be taken and doing religious and rituals that kind of still acknowledge the loss of the child. So this is something that when we finally have the reunion, I mean, it's amazing. I've been 10 times, but I say I'm addicted to the reunions because it is like a human rights miracle. When you work in the field of human rights, it's a lot of sad stories. But with the stolen children, when there is a reunion, at that moment of reunion, it's full of joy and people hugging each other, touching each other, like, it's very tactile. But then after that, it gets complicated again, because, there's language barriers, there's cultural barriers, there's economic barriers, because there's no process for providing them reparations, really, is what, acknowledgement and reparations, so that they can mend their lives and find a way to stay connected with their families, whether they remain in Indonesia or Timor-Leste, that it should be that they have the resources to be empowered to make those choices. So sometimes people, after being connected, they get disconnected again, or particularly the stolen children, because they're poor, they lose their number, their phone, and then we cannot contact them again. So it is a lot of challenges. Also a lot of challenges in the Timor side, because they had been considered dead or gone for so long, so that suddenly land was already divided up between siblings, and suddenly someone else comes. It is something that you cannot undo the impact and the violations and the violence that a family experiences when a child is taken with one reunion. The reunion is just the beginning of a long process for healing, and I think that's basically the main finding and the main recommendation that we are trying to say to the Indonesian and Timorese government, that we need more support for long-term healing process on both sides. A lot of the children, the stolen children, when we find them, they have no paperwork. They don't have birth certificates, etc. So we get the Human Rights Commission in Indonesia to help us get them Indonesian passports so that they can travel to Timor-Leste. And now a lot of these passports have already expired. We need more support, basically. And there is certainly from the Indonesia side even though there is some engagement, and the Indonesian Foreign Ministry, for example, and the Human Rights Commission has been engaged to a certain extent, but the Foreign Ministry is quickly wants us to use the term that they were just separated, and to describe not the violations, but the sort of, that they were being saved by the Indonesian soldiers, etc. So there's a lot of work ahead with Komnas HAM, the Women's Commission, the Human Rights Commission, and in Timor-Leste, the Provedor's Office for Human Rights, and the Centro Nacional Chega, which is the follow-up commission for the recommendations of the two truth commissions. And I think there's so much archives that can still be tracked down in the Islamic and Christian education institutes, as well as in the Indonesian military, that has not been transparent. We've been doing this all from kind of word of mouth and oral history. And here are just some fantastic pictures of the reunions. Again, it's an amazing experience to be so lucky to watch and participate in these reunions. So I think that's as much as I can say in 20 minutes. There's a lot more to share, but I think I'm happy to take questions and discuss further later.
Thank you, Val and Irene. I'm taking questions, and it depends a little bit on how the question goes, to whom you address. I'm taking them one by one or group them together, but let's see how it goes. So, any questions from the audience? Please introduce yourself quickly.
I'm Uli Sidagalo from Sudirman Catholic University. Thank you very much for your presentation, Helena, and also Bugalu. When I listened to your explanation, and then something come up in my mind. First, this story between Indonesia and Timor-Leste actually explains the politics of domination, using culture, different civilization, people, and also education to show that Indonesia, as a winner, over Timor-Leste, and then usually in this context, Indonesia use children and also women, as Galo already explained. Actually, there were many women being raped, and you, Helena, explained how actually our government did like a positive way to take children from Timor-Leste and then educated them and also civilized them with Javanese or with the domination of our culture. This is the idea that I got from your explanation. Please kindly explain your idea and also your comment about this. Thank you.
Do you want to take it?
Thanks, Uli. That's exactly what's going on. As I said, dominating colonial powers find that you can't just use violence to dominate a population. You need cooperation, and the best way to do that is to start with children, civilize them into the culture of the dominating power, and it's just easiest to do with children, and that's what happened, and also, well, the women's story is a different story, but the children's story is hidden from public view. That's what made me decide I had to write this story. Yeah.
And I think that connects perfectly with what we heard this morning about soft colonialism and violence. Agus has a question, and Mada.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you to Helen and Gallo for the inspiring, reflective panels. Your research was conducted in times of turbulence, was it? The research in the time of turbulence, and those children were taken out of East Timor during the turbulent years, political years.
All the children were taken, or most of the children were taken between 1975 and 1999, but after 1999 there were children, as Gary mentioned, also sent to Indonesia. It was, there were a lot of children that were taken, pushed out of East Timor and placed into camps in West Timor in particular, and from there lots of organisations tried to take them on to institutions in Indonesia. In fact, there was a Catholic organisation that was, some of the members, it was called Yayasan Hati, if any of you remember that, and they tried to, the organisers of that organisation had been, they were supporters of Indonesia, their particular family, and they had been taken by some nuns from Ganjuran, Boromirs, or how do we say, order, and educated there. And they lived quite close to, it's an interesting connection, they lived quite close to the orphanage where the children that I talked about went. And when, after 1999, they decided to bring children to Indonesia, or to mainland Indonesia, to Java especially, from the camps in West Timor, and place them in Catholic institutions. That's after 1999. There was a whole lot of reporting of this in the Indonesian press and the international press in 1999. The Catholic Church in 1975 had actually supported the integration of East Timor with Indonesia, but in 1999 they changed their minds about that, and they refused. When they found out what the organisers of Yayasan Hati were doing, they were going around to the institutions where they placed the children and trying to indoctrinate them about reintegration of East Timor with Indonesia. And when the archbishops of the church found out, they stood them up with various smaller groups in Catholic institutions throughout Java, and some were placed in private institutions also that had links with the Catholics. But so this was a really sort of dark time for a lot of these children from the camps, and I had some very personal experience which I didn't know how to handle it, because I was at the orphanage where Petrus and his friends were in Mada, and the sisters there told me that they had expelled a staff member, a Japanese staff member, for pedophilia basically. And when I got to, then I was in West Timor, and I met parents who had been, whose children had been taken away by this person to Java, and I was told about these kids. But I didn't write about this because I wasn't able myself. I did tell people about it, but you know, you can see that how the vulnerable children were used for various means in this. But I don't know whether you were asking me the question, was my research conducted before 99 or after 99?
Actually, my question is, I'm wondering whether there is anything that you or you guys have done to revisit these children after they are grown up now, they have become adults, and how they see their experiences back in time.
I think that's very
Bambang was mentioning of compiling stories of how many hundred children, and I'm wondering whether it is about their also reflective time in their personal histories, and whether it deals with those children already as adults or still when they were still
Yeah, so
Let's go.
maybe I should just add a few things. One is that when we find the survivors, they're already adults, right? Because they were taken between 1975 to 1999. Every time we talk about stolen children, we're actually referring to adult survivors who were taken as children, under 18. Many of them 5-year-olds, 6-year-olds, when they were only 5 or 6-year-old. Some teenagers, a lot of the boys, because they were child soldiers, they were 10, 11, 12, 13 when they were taken. So I want to clarify a few things. You asked, was it a time of turbulence? Yes, of course, it was conflict. It was war. It was during the Indonesian occupation. But under the Geneva Convention, which Indonesia signed in 1954 during the Sukarno era, if a child gets lost in conflict, then the parties that are in war
have the obligation to protect that child and to find their parents or their next of kin, right? And what happened so from our 200 stories that we've collected, there is a lot of coercion. Most of them, I hope I'll send you all the link to a film that we made called Nina and the Stolen Children of Timor-Leste. And Nina, she was basically taken at gunpoint by a soldier from Bukarin Bikeke in the 80s, right? So it wasn't because things were chaotic and the children got separated, and that's kind of the point of view that, like I mentioned, this kind of way of re-looking at history, and particularly from the foreign ministry, the Indonesian foreign ministry, wanting that kind of framing of the issue. But I think we can look at the data, look at the stories, and the stories speak for themselves. And it is about the politics of domination. Like our first person, Uli, I think I couldn't quite hear your name. And if you look at it, that pattern still exists in Indonesia today. If you go and look at the Panti Asuhan, there is, there's the class oppression, there is kind of the idea that, these people need to be in this particular religion and not that religion, not the indigenous religion, for example, in NTT or in Papua, etc. So those kind of ideas of dominating and trying to take control of the children still exist in our culture today. But in Timor-Leste, it became exacerbated, it became worsened with the conflict and with so many military soldiers who were acting with complete impunity. And as you can see in the Truth Commission report, the CHEGA report, that it became something that the high-level soldiers did, so the Perwira and then all the other soldiers down the hierarchy were also doing the same thing. Children were put in boxes, boarded on boats, the Navy boats, where there would be 10 to 12 children who people brought, the same way they were also bringing birds and, exotic birds and this and that, because, it was very much in this framework of domination and impunity.
Adding this to the question of Agus, I had Marit, you had a question as well.
Thank you both, Helen and Gadjah, for wonderful presentations. Helen, this morning, Professor Bambang Purwanto said Indonesian history is actually political history, and children are not relevant to that political history. And the title of your lecture reads Child Transfers as a Lens on Post-Colonial Nation Building. So it is a very political history. My question is about the systematics of that history. And Gadjah actually touched upon that in her answer just now. But I'm still a bit, my question comes from the problem that we have in our project with existing narratives. So narratives that already surround growing up in an institution. That's a benevolent thing, your parents did the right thing, etc. So we have two problems. There's this narrative of benevolence, which in the case of the child transfers out of East Timor seems to be a very individual mode of telling a story of one child and one soldier who took the child. So where are the systemic aspects in this? And the second thing is that there is no such thing, no understanding of child separation as a practice or as a practice, as a concept. So there is no community for us. There is no identifiable community that is tied together by the fact that people grew up in an institution, were taken away from their mothers, etc. So we're battling, we're not battling, we're exploring what that means for our research and what we can do to build, to work at building some sort of community with a communal sense about this practice of child separation. And was the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, was that the defining moment where a community of survivors formed itself, or would you say this worked differently? So on the one hand, the systemic aspects of the removal, and on the other hand, the community formation on the side of the survivors. It may be a too complicated question, but I still think that you two are the ones who can help us answer such questions. Thank you for trying.
Thank you, Marit. Do you want to go first, or Gadjah?
I think that Gadjah can certainly talk about the CAVR. Of course, as far as I was concerned with, I volunteered for the CAVR, and this is where I first started to hear these stories, although I had heard something in Java, and it was from the CAVR experience that I decided to write this book. But it was perhaps the context of the CAVR where we were able to look at, to what extent, we thought about that a lot, about to what extent is this systematic or just individual actors. And I think, we came to the conclusion that it was quite systematic. But let Gadjah talk to it because she was the director of the CAVR. She'll talk more about it than me.
I couldn't hear everything, so I'm going to do a little guess here. I think in terms of the CAVR, the CAVR tried to look at all the human rights violations committed by all parties during 1974 to 1999. So the stolen children story, and in the CAVR, in the Commission report, we do call it child transfers as well. It was definitely a dramatic story, but there were 1,000 other dramatic stories. We had the stories of torture, of the island prison Atauro, famine, where 100,000 people died between 1978 to 1979, the sexual violence. So I think the stolen children, the transfer of children was one of, a whole bunch of gems that were uncovered in the Truth Commission process. And we took, about 8,000 statements. We conducted research, we did public hearings. It was very, very emotional and very exhaustive kind of survivor-centered storytelling of Timor-Leste's history, Timor-Leste's human rights history. So it still stands out amongst all the other truth commissions that have been around in the world. As I think Priscilla Heiner says it's one of the 5 best. With South Africa, etc. Even though I always say we're the Tuk-Tuk Truth Commission, not the sort of Rolls-Royce one, which was, of course, the South African, because we have to work with. I think even Helene's assistant was just fresh out of high school, with some very young, committed people emerging leaders in the new nation, Timor-Leste at the time. But in terms of community, I think now, after a while, we struggled about what to call this phenomena. Is it child transfers? Is it separated children? Speaking with the survivors, they chose the term labarik lakon, which labarik in Teku means children and lakon means missing, disappeared. So the disappeared children, the missing children. Now the labarik lakon community is quite strong. We have a working group, Labarik Lakon working group, which is NGOs from the two countries. But for example, Sulawesi, where a big bulk of the survivors are from South Sulawesi, Malili, all these different districts there, where there was a strong battalions came from those areas to East Timor and came back with the children. They have also their own community. They've been doing sort of peer support for each other. There have been some activities where they try to gather their memories and support each other, and they are strengthened by going on the reunions with their peers. So. It's an ongoing process, and now, interestingly, the children of the Labarik Lakon, so half Indonesian, half Timorese, are becoming interested in their story. How did I come to be? Why am I half Timorese? What happened? And I think the other thing is, as somebody who loves history and thinks that it has such an important role in our everyday life, when we gather the survivors in a workshop, we usually do like a 3-day workshop before we take them to Timor-Leste. And during that time, we go through, their worries and, their life stories, etc. But one of the, things that is really comes across really strongly is how much disinformation there is about East Timor, and that they have lived all their lives inside that disinformation. So, they say, when we arrive, when we land in Timor-Leste, will there be gun shots? And because the guerrillas are in charge, because they've only been hearing kind of the Indonesian military version of history, of East Timor's history. So, really a lot of interesting things to unravel and talk about.
I can take one last question. Oh, come in. Yeah. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you for the time. Actually, I'm not going to asking, but I'm going to appreciate about the presentation, because actually last year I was held an archive exhibition with the theme of the Soul Children and the title of the Silent Echoes of the Labarik Lakon Timor-Leste. But sadly, we are cannot have a reply from Gadjah. Actually, we already emailing Gadjah, but there's no reply. So it is kind of full circle moment, but it is very sad. But yeah, at the time, we are very grateful for using the Gadjah's archive, and also we have read the 1,000 pages of Chega, and also Nina's movie, and also there's a movie in YouTube called September 13th. It is about the stolen children also, and also actually the exhibition is part of the Curating Archives joint course with ISI Yogyakarta. So it is final exam for it. We are held an exhibition, and also we are trying to contact it, but there's there was no reply. So it is really sad, but yeah, sure. So also we are trying to comparing the other archives and with the Indonesian newspapers such as Kompas and also Timor-Leste's newspaper, but sadly there's none news about the stolen children, but there are a lot of news about Sorojo operation and the Santa Cruz massacre. It was really sad, but there's no any information about the stolen children or the Laber Krakon. And also at our exhibition last year, there's actually one person who lives in Jakarta who being the stolen children or the Laber Krakon, but sadly at first we were being asked him about the oral history and interviewing stuff like that, but sadly because of he is already settled and he's got pretty decent job in here, and he wasn't wanted to be interviewed later. So and also like there's also an Instagram called @laberklakon. There's still the Correcting Archive exhibition program. So I think that's it. Thank you.
No, thank you for putting that to the floor and to let everyone know. I mean, this is student here. Well, thank you very much. And I also very much like your remark about the second generations having questions, because that's something I noticed in my own research, and then about Dutch colonial times and children's upbringing in institutions. It's a second and a third generation who are asking questions about the lives of their parents or grandparents, actually. So I think that's the similarity. I'm closing up this panel and then give the floor to Agus and Marit, who will close off the whole day.
General chairperson.
Well, I'll put you first. Thank you, Gadjah, for joining us.
Please contact us again. Okay, thank you. I'm gonna leave you all. Bye-bye.
Bye. Okay, thank you for the speaker and Dr. Michael Jackson. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we have had a productive and inspiring time together, and this event is about to come to an end. I hope you found the conference presentation are informative and helpful. To all registered our school participants, our program tomorrow will take place in this room at 8:30 a.m. Thank you, and may all of you have a safe journey home. Bye-bye.
I think Agus and Marit wants to say something.
Is that okay?
Just give the mic to Marit.
The last item. We have one final item on the agenda, and it is quite understandable that you think it's 5 o'clock. Wow, I did a good job, and you wonderful job. Excellent. But if all of you still have about, sorry, yes, zeker. Yes, zeker. If all of you still have a bit of juice in the head left, no. So we'll just wrap up very quickly. Agus and I offer you a couple of points, first thoughts, based on what we did today. Where can I stand so I'm not really unlike Scotty? Yeah. Okay, let me show us the next slide. So one of the things we discussed actually throughout the day, children without history, and I think we can agree that children do have history, and that we as historians have ways to find out about this history. And Bambang Purwanto touched on that paradox. Children are not in Indonesian historiography, they're not represented very much, but they're very much present So they still go unmentioned in Indonesian historiography because it's mainly political history for which children are not relevant, is what he said.
Well, I beg to differ, and I think Hélène begs to differ too, and I have a sort of way of flying.
Yet he also explained to us that children are very, very present in Indonesia's visual archive. So that visual archive can also help us trace children and help us think of questions and help us reflect on who are these children, how are they portrayed, what are they actually doing, who else is in the photo, what situation, where is it, etc. Children are not just visible, but they are depicted, they're photographed, and they're filmed as historical actors. So they're not just objects who are being photographed, but they're subjects, they're doing something. Think of the film where the children, small children, were looking for caterpillars in the tobacco leaves. Wonderful, excruciatingly wonderful archival visual material. And children were indeed historical actors in social, economic, and political history. We heard about child labor in plantations. We heard about a question about children as combatants in violent regime change. We heard a lot about pupils in faith-based institutions. And we heard about the displaced children, about whom Hélène van Klinken and Galo wanted to talk. They are historical actors in Indonesia's political history, case study of Laksmi. So the agency, we should reckon with the fact that children are historical actors, that they do have an agency, and that also pertains to the children who were educated in faith-based institutions, whom we often see through the lens of these institutions, but as Eka mentioned in her presentation, children sometimes ask for this education. They separate themselves from their families. We know other instances. They separate themselves from their families and their backgrounds or their communities in order to become educated in such an institution. Okay, so these are only first thoughts, just to wrap up. We have 2 more slides coming. So we talked about children not being a child. What is a child? Well, that depends on where you are in the world, where you are in time. Children are an unstable category in history. So we need to contextualize, we need to historicize, we need to take into account space, time, gender, age, class, ethnic, cultural background, and perhaps even more things. So Indria, Laksmi, Gamayanti explained to us the definition of children in contemporary Indonesia is built up by laws and regulations that define, delineate, and shape children as subjects. Subjects with rights and needs which need to be attended to. She also explained that right now birth families are the preferred context in which children should be raised. And alternative care in Indonesia, in this day and age, is only a last resort, and only if it is for the benefit of the child, if the child would run a risk in its own familial environment. Yet historically, there are many more practices of education of and care for children, including circulation of children within family and wider kinship structures, transfers of children to uncles, aunts, grandparents, and back to the parents. So with that information that we got today, we also need to refine the concept of child separation by including such actually normal practices. Again, these practices need to be contextualized and historicized with time, space, etc. And it's what we learned from what Gadjah and Indria, Laksmi, Gamayanti presented today. Tamim, let's go for the last one. All right, we're zooming in on pupils in faith-based institutions. That's what we did today already, and what we're going to do much more the forthcoming days in which we prepare the participants of the summer school for the field work. So we heard today already some inspiring questions and approaches that put children in the narrative, in the center of the narrative. The papers by Radjah, by Eka, by Geertje, by Chiara, by Hélène, and by Galu, sorry. Yeah, I see, I want to write it down. Okay, I'm getting tired as well. So is my slide. Galu and presentations that indicate that these pupils led quite different lives, perhaps even privileged lives, than the majority of indigenous children. Think of the child labor, think of the risk of exploitation, poverty, hunger. So what the presenters offer today are multiple perspectives, multiple histories, and they encourage us to look for paper trails, connecting Chiara's presentation in particular, connecting archives, connecting sources, printed and unprinted. And also, I don't know who it was who talked about the money, I think it was Radjah. Follow the money. So you know who paid for pupils. Was that a colonial authority? Was that a military authority, a religious authority, private parties? Because those funding opportunities also shape differences between pupils in institutional education. And last but not least, and that's what we're going to look into much more tomorrow, is the connection between institutional archives and other sources. What other sources? We don't know yet, but we're going to explore that in the preparation for the field work for the locations-based research. So that was it from us. Agus, something to add?
Actually, you have just one thing is that this is kind of an opening sessions that we have today. I'm personally very inspired and stimulated. But I also got texts from colleagues asking for any possible follow-up.
We'll bring out the voice.
Yeah, but it means the whole sessions really touch quite a lot of people, also Indonesian historians who have so far neglected the position of children, and we were struck by the fact that, well, technically speaking, children are missing. I mean, they are only counted as numbers, but recently cases against children or violence against children are really on the rise. So, and we are trying to, today's sessions show us that the roots might have been there for quite some time. And thank you very much, Marit, for all the connections between the points today, and also to our speakers today. Karen, thank you so much. And also everyone here, Mbak Eka, Mbak Radjah, and all also all the participants, thank you for being here today, and for the participants of summer schools, we still have to continue the discussions tomorrow and the days after, okay? And thank you so much.
And can we have a last big round of applause for Agus and his speakers?
Okay, we can all go.